Reading 18 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice Nicoll. Volume 2. Birdlip, May 6, 1944. The Enneagram 14. Further note on hydrogens. Many questions are asked about the position of hydrogens in the octaves. There is, for example, hydrogen 48, which is created out of the food that we eat by successive transformations within the body. This is the hydrogen that we use for our ordinary thinking, and which works the relatively mechanical part of the intellectual center, or mind. With this hydrogen, we can only think in terms of yes or no, and so we see everything divided into irreconcilable opposites. When we think with hydrogen 24, however, we have a different picture of things, for by means of this psychic energy, we see everything in a much finer way, in a much more subtle interconnection, so that the stark opposites disappear and everything appears blended together in a marvelous harmony. Now these hydrogens, 48 and 24, are connected with the notes Sol and La. Sol 48 arises out of the transformation of Do 768 into Re 384, into Mi 192, into Fa 96, into Sol 48, and then into La 24, and finally into Si 12. Now let us suppose that the impressions octave is set to work by means of a man's living as consciously as he can for a short time. Here there is Do 48. Here is a hydrogen, again, of the value of 48, but on the note Do. This hydrogen, by transformation within the awakened man, passes to Re 24. There are now two 48s and two 24s, Do 48 and Sol 48, and La 24 and Re 24. What difference can there be in these cases? Let us think of the matter in this way. Suppose that you have 100 golden sovereigns and you divide them into two lots. You decide to pay half of these golden sovereigns into your bank and to use the other half in payment of your debts. Now, the golden sovereigns are just the same in regard to their matter, but they have quite different destinations and potentialities. That gold which you pay into the bank can accumulate, whereas that gold which you pay out has gone as far as it can. And I am quite sure your thoughts about the two sums will be quite different. And I think you will agree that the 50 sovereigns that you are going to pay into the bank have a fresher feeling about them than those that you are going to pay out. And in somewhat the same way, emotions that you feel through Re 24 are far fresher than those of La 24. You know how anything that is capable of many transformations has a certain quality of newness and vitality, like small buds, whereas a thing that is nearly over, that has nearly completed its course, is quite different. Re 24 is an earlier position in the octave than is La 24. A full octave lies between Do and Do. Actually, the new Do starts a new octave. We develop from a cell which passes to the state C. We are then born as babies and begin a new Do. The octave that we left, which began with the fertilized cell as Do, we know nothing about now. We became old and then became young again. So you understand that Mi 12 is younger than Si 12, and that Re 24 is younger than La 24. And in general, you must understand that the same matter may be under many different potentialities and destinations, according to its relation with the things that surround it. In the country of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. If you find it so difficult to understand about hydrogens and their relationship, Look at the outer world and see how things are of quite different materiality, and how their destinations are quite different, and how you can classify things by their uses, and how nothing is independent, but everything is connected together, how one thing depends on another, and how its significance changes in accordance with circumstances, and how a thing at one moment may be the most important thing, and at the next moment quite unimportant. In seeing outer life like this, you are looking at different substances which are constantly being controlled by forces acting on them. You are really studying substances and the law of 3 and the law of 7. You all know better and worse in the outer world, finer and coarser, more rare and more common. You all know what things of high quality and things of commoner quality are. You all know what refining means, what separating means. You can distinguish between great literature and common literature. How then should it be so difficult to understand what the hydrogens are that work your psychic apparatus, that work your mind and cells, that work your centers, either in a poor way or in a better way? I fancy that the real trouble that most of you have is that you do not try to get hold of these very simple diagrams, and so you always remain in a state of confusion, simply because you will not give yourselves the easy shock of trying to grasp the general meaning of the diagrams. You have got to use hydrogen 48 first of all. That is, you have got to try to concentrate on these diagrams with your formatory center so that you can write them down yourselves. Then, when this has been laid down, and you begin to think about the meaning, and you begin to hear some of these commentaries, you will have moments of seeing more deeply their significance. And this means that you will begin to use hydrogen 24 in your understanding. Sometimes this happens as if there were a sudden flash, and in this connection I will quote you an example that I came across the other day. The mathematician Hamilton, who had thought for years about how to multiply two-dimensional quantities, suddenly while walking along a country road saw the solution, which he said came to him as though a circuit had been suddenly completed in my mind, and a blaze of light resulted. He was so amazed that he took out his pocket knife and cut the formulae which he had just seen on the stones of a bridge nearby. This is seeing a problem through a higher hydrogen in the intellectual center. This is definite proof amongst hundreds of other known examples that the mind can work on different levels. If you can see this, then you are beginning to see what different hydrogens mean. And if you have never felt anything of this in regard to your own states, and the quality of your own feelings, or the understanding of your minds, then it is because you do not give yourself even in the slightest degree this first conscious shock that makes it possible for a man to touch new influences. Questions have been asked as to why the highest hydrogen appears in the lowest part of the 3-story factory. You must all understand that these different stories do not mean, for man as he is, lower or higher. Man as he is uses only hydrogen 48 in the top story, whereas his moving and instinctive centers work with hydrogens 24. This simply means that the work going on in the first story is infinitely more intelligent than the work going on in the third story. That hydrogen 12 is at the note C means that it can only do one thing. What is this hydrogen 12 at this point in the octave? It is the hydrogen connected with the possibility of a destiny that is capable of uniting with its corresponding opposite, and so starting a new octave. This very high living hydrogen contains the possibility of producing a new dough, that is, of starting something quite new, a new octave. The shock between C and dough is looked after very carefully by the cosmic influences that wish to keep life on earth constantly multiplying. It may be asked, therefore, what Me-12 means and what children it can produce. Let us remember that Me-12 is not made mechanically, naturally, ordinarily. If a person begins to give himself the first conscious shock, the shock of self-remembering, the shock of the whole work, if he begins to transform his daily contact with life and not take things as always in the ordinary way in which he always takes them, if he feels deeply that he is always doing something else and that he is related to something else which gradually becomes more important, then he may make hydrogen 12 at the point Me in the octave. That is, Me-12. This Me-12 will create, as it were, a child that he has to look at very closely if he wishes to remain in the work. What is this child created by Me-12? It is something quite new in him. He must pay attention to this new-born thing in him, which is the beginning of his own rebirth. This new thing, this child, can easily die if he goes to sleep. When this child exists in a man or woman, it must be given the right food, and they must be very careful of it. Of course, you cannot see this child externally, and you must remember that this child born in yourself, this child that is your relationship to the work, this child that both men and women can have, appears at the note Me. It is not at C, where it has to become something else instantly. This invisible child is at the note Me, and therefore it is at a place where there is a missing semitone, in a way similar to the child born out of C12. Now, the shock that has to be given to the child born at C12 is obvious. But what is the shock that is required to carry the child born at Me-12 beyond the place of the missing semitone? How often people give rise to a small child which they murder because they have not the strength nor the depth of feeling and aim necessary to bring this child up beyond their ordinary level. How many spermatic seeds the work sows. How often people have for a moment a child in the work. Please understand that I am speaking of these invisible children born in your own understanding. And how often these children, like their counterparts in life, suffer from scurvy, typhoid fever, etc., as when you become negative in the work. The power of conception of man in the spiritual sphere, that is, in his thinking and his feeling, is very weak, especially when a man or woman is left without help for a time, without praise or without special attention. In this work, you have to keep something invisible going in spite of all external difficulties. In the Gospels, it is called faith. In this work, it is work on yourself in connection with your aim. You remember that it was said you have to fight for this work. All the time there are negative eyes based on sensual life, on the visible scene, that attack you. If you have no capacity in yourself of inner conception and inner thinking and inner feeling, the work will fall by the wayside or on stony ground, and when the heat of the sun is too strong, this little thing born in you from the spermatic seed of the work will fade. Example, the children born of Me-12 will continually die. You will have a period of enthusiasm, and then when you are offended, having no real power of inner conception, your children will die. It is a very strange thing to reflect on what it means to keep this work alive and young in yourselves. Certainly this is not possible if you look to the evidence of the senses for proof. What did that unknown writer, supposed to be a woman, say in Hebrews 11:1? Quote, "Faith is the evidence of things not seen." Now, when you understand something and see the truth of it in your own mind, Do you wish to be supported by the evidence of things seen? Do you wish to have people to agree with you, or are you strong enough to do without the proof of external and visible things? If you are not strong enough to conceive a child in your own mind and keep this child alive, this newborn thing in you, then you can only expect that it will die through sheer starvation. Every time you connect thoughts, see new meaning, apply the work to yourself, notice what you are saying, see your own mechanicalness, separate from negative emotions, not allow yourself to go with weak, silly eyes or dangerous eyes. In short, every time you give yourself the first conscious shock, the shock of this work, you give nourishment to this child that is your new self.